Hello, YouTube. I am really sorry about the delay. Life happened pretty hard. I needed to find a new job, and then I kind of fell into a depressive slump. Nothing serious, I just hadn't had any motivation to do much of anything. I'm mostly out of that now. Got back to what I had recorded previously, which was supposed to be episode 2, character creation. And then I began working on the art assets, and holy shit, I need to do a lot of work for that. So I'm going to set that one aside for now and work on the assets between other projects and between episodes, and then re-record it and then get it out to you later. In the meantime, let's talk about some rules and filling the gaps between them. The rules in a book lay out a system, a way how various interactions can be played out, and a general feel for what to expect during the campaign in the setting. Every action that has a failure state and a level of difficulty associated with it usually has an action that's played out on the part of the player to see how it goes in the flow of game.
I cook a meal to impress our guests.
Roll me a cooking check, please.
I take a swing at the yogurt.
Roll an attack.
I cast instant shelter to keep us secure through the night.
Okay, first you mark down having cast the spell, and would you please let me see the floor plan for the mansion you're summoning?
I seduce the priestess.
Most systems don't go into much detail about how to go about that task, but you can usually cobble together a couple of rolls and see whether you're successful or not. And that's what I wanted to talk about. Making up rules has its place at the table, because no matter what system you use, there will be actions that don't have rules written explicitly for them. No matter what system, even the most long-running and ever-expanding rule sets out there, cannot account for 100% of the actions that a player will want to take during the course of the game. Usually a good GM will ask you to make a check or two, spend some points, like spells or energy or key or something, whatever's appropriate for the situation, and use that for the action. And if the situation keeps on cropping up, then a more definitive and permanent house rule will be made. That's something for players to be aware of. A coddled ruling in the heat of the moment should never be taken as law. Asking you to roll a quick lockpick check to simulate unseating the wine spring, the clockwork golem, that serves two purposes. First, it allows you to try to do the thing that you said you wanted to try to do. Second, it keeps game flowing. In order to create a real fair ruling, you'd have to break it down, figure out what kind of roll should it be in the first place, what is it being rolled against, what kind of other modifiers should be present in consideration, what kind of damage are we talking about in a successful roll. And in the amount of time I've spent talking about what should be considered in order to make the roll, we've already spent about 10 times as much time as I'd usually ask for a single roll. Normally, it's...
I take a swing at the yogurt.
I'll need an attack roll, and first, he's out of reach of you, so you'd either have to move closer or switch to your spear. Bam! Done! Dice in motion. Frank, what are you doing? When a session is over, slapdash rulings sit with the GM, because it's either A, way too easy for it to break the game, or B, you've inadvertently made it way too hard and dissuaded your players from trying to be inventive. Neither of which is good. A broken rule makes it so difficult to bring a meaty challenge to your players, it drains the fun out of the game for them when they can just walk all over everything. Yes, it's exhilarating at first, but it's like riding a roller coaster. Lots of fun and adrenaline the first time you ride it, but the 5th time you've ridden it today, you're paying more attention to the peeling paint on the seat in front of you than you are the actual curves. And when doing something off the books is too difficult to be viable, you stifle and restrict your players. They're playing on the pages rather than trying to do anything. They're turning a crank rather than using their imaginations. And that, again, slowly drains the fun from the players. So a good GM will sit down and answer questions that I rattled off a couple paragraphs ago. Write up a rule that probably will state, like, you'll have to be in grapple, have it unaware or something. Make it as difficult as a called shot in combat. Maybe additional difficulty for small target through armor. For results, like having it run on momentum of its flywheels and cause it to unload its payload in 5 rounds before keeling over. Turning the fight from a straight punch-up to suddenly a survival match as it's just unleashing hell all at once. It could still really steamroll somebody. And everyone can help write up a rule. It doesn't need to sit squarely as a GM's solo responsibility to do so. It should be a collaborative effort with the GM, but a player can put a hand in the setting and the campaign, just enough to make a fingerprint on the mechanics. I was writing a character up once for somebody else's game, and I asked the GM if I could have a custom trait based on a character's backstory. She was a pit fighter, and she learned to ignore the taunts and insults of foe and audience. Focus down, get in the fight, and let there be nothing else. So we wrote down a trait that allowed for a +2 bonus on any saving throws made to resist language-dependent spells. That's an interesting thing to think about. Different mechanics get different names in the handbooks for a very subtle reason. Traits and feats and class abilities and racial abilities in Pathfinder look very similar on a surface level and survive that way in a quick perusal. But unpack and then compare them, they start to get some pretty well-defined borders around what they do in terms of scope and function. Feats become new options or slight power bumps for characters. Class abilities are growing powers. Racial abilities are basic stepping stones for where the character starts out and goes based on what they are. Traits come from the character's backstory, act a lot like feats, but are very much more conservative about the way that they express themselves. The trait above? Language dependent, meaning it's viable against command, enthralled, geas, suggestion, might hamper charm depending on how you rule things, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, I am digressing, but thoughts like that are the reason why people suggest being a player until you're fluent with the rules before running a game. And then you run games before you start trying to pick apart the moving parts and see how they run. Figure out things like why feats have prerequisites like an odd-numbered stat. I think I figured it out. Say your dexterity modifier, gives you a 0 bonus to dice rolls at 10 and 11, +1 at 12 and 13, +2 at 14, 15, so on and so forth. So when you're buying stats, why add that second point to bring it from 12 to 13? Well, it allows you to pick up the relevant feats like 2-weapon fighting and such. So every point added to a stat allows for something to be gained. You or I may not think about that all the time, but hundreds of hands have gone into writing these rules, playtesting these rules. So there's a damn good reason behind a lot of it. And even they let flaws through. And those flaws can break the balance of game if abused. There are resources out there for you to help write your own rules. Forums where you can post and go take a look at some of the homebrewed rules other people have written up. Read reviews about those rules. Post your own and people will give you an honest appraisal about what you've written for better or for worse. Now, don't get offended or defensive about this. A lot of these people can abuse the core rules with a terrifying magnitude of game-breaking bullshit. So if anything you've written can be abused, they will nail those words to the wall. And there's one last thing I cannot stress enough about creating house rules. You never want to take agency away from a player. Give the players options. Give the players new ways to interact in a semi-predictable fashion. Give them a little bit more power. Give them new ways to express it. But the moment you can assert direct control over a player, you're going down a dark path. Making attacks with a certain weapon hit your allies half the time, and compulsing the player to use that weapon, dick move. Forcing a character ability to be used against himself, or writing a rule that lets you bank critical failures and then make them return for a second time later. Ugh! Look through the player handbook, look through the Dungeon Master's Guide. Hell, D20PFSRD has under the game mastering page the 9 essential roles of the GM. He is the host, the mastermind, the mediator, the actor, patron, world builder, storyteller, game designer, and director. This is not puppeteer. You do not control the PCs in any way. You provide bait, rewards, punishments, traps, and challenges. You put them through the ringer with the promise that the plot is continuing on the other side and they might have a hand and an influence on it. If you're doing your job right, you never have to tell a player what to do or what not to do. If you're really, really proud of the speech you've written that just got interrupted, or if you're really, really excited about the battle that they just bypassed, pocket it. Retool it, and then bring it back later. Or just show them what they missed when they move on. That's the thing. You're not writing a story. You're unfolding events before characters and watching their reactions. Then you're reacting to their reactions as they move about. Imagine your campaign as a really elaborate chess game. You have 10 times the number of pieces, and you control the layout of the board. You have so much power over it all. But your end goal is to lose. But it's not really losing. You're completing a story. You're completing a tale where you don't control the heroes, only the villain. The player should have the option to do just about anything, whether or not it should be feasible. Sure, you can try. The DC's north of 384. Good luck on that with a 20-sided die. But even something more reasonable than that, but you don't want it happening right now, should have the possibility of some form of success.
I'm picking the guard's pockets for the keys to the office.
Okay, so let's say I don't want them into that office yet. So maybe something occurs to keep the players away from the office, or maybe the guard notices that the key's missing, and so comes to interrogate the player characters, and they have to bluff and redirect the suspicions to something else. Meanwhile, it's still missing, so people are on guard duty at that office trying to keep what's inside safe and secure. So they'd have to sneak past these guys in order to get inside in the second place. So, yes, they succeeded in getting the key. But I, as a GM, have to change the scenario some, alter some oncoming challenges. And the consequences of that action made it infinitely harder to act on it. But everything on the character sheet is under the control of the player. The player has to have primary control over the skills, the powers, the items on their sheet. So even cursed items on it. Every issue and problem that might arise from their presence has to be filtered through the actions of the player, or the stats on the character sheet, in order to overcome those and function independently or alter the character's actions. You have the world under your domain, the land, the inhabitants, the weather. Let the players have themselves. In the meantime, tell your tales, share the experience, and be well, everyone.